Hey there, this is Michelle and welcome back to the Canadian History, a Chronology channel. Today's episode, number 28, is about Canada's continued relationship to the American Revolution. This will be part 4 of our journey. Now, before we start, let's take a quick moment to review what we saw and heard in the last episode. We saw that in 1778, King Louis XVI of France signed a mutual defense pact with the Americans. That by 1783, the British Army and thousands of loyalists fall back to New York City and a mass exodus begins, with nearly 100,000 loyalists fleeing. Some 50,000 head north into Canada. Then in 1783, Kingston, Ontario would be founded by the Loyalists, while other Loyalists moved to the southwest region of the province of Quebec. And that in 1784, New Brunswick and Cape Breton Island were carved out of the territory of Nova Scotia and were made into 2 separate colonies to support the vast number of Loyalist refugees. And finally, in 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed and ended the American Revolution between Great Britain and the United States. Okay, with that out of the way, let's look at the creation of Upper and Lower Canada. But first, let's talk about Guy Carleton. He was at first the governor of the province of Quebec. Then, during the American Revolution, he was the commander of all British forces in North America. And now, he's returning to Canada as overall governor, but this time he has a new title. Carleton is now Lord Dorchester. Unfortunately for Carleton, he will be the first in a long line of leaders in British North America, Canada, who would try to reconcile the competing goals of French and English Canada. Now, instead of one large union of British colonies in British North America, the Loyalist immigrants petitioned to have the larger colony of Quebec split in 2. At this time, the colony of Quebec stretched from the St. Lawrence to the Great Lakes. It was huge. So it was that the Constitutional Act of 1791 divided the colony of Quebec along the Ottawa River. In the west, or upriver on the St. Lawrence, Upper Canada was established, and it would be English. Later, this colony would become known as the province of Ontario. In the east, what's left of Quebec is established as Lower Canada, as it was downriver or lower on the St. Lawrence River. It would be French, and would later become known as the province of Quebec. This seems simple at first, but would have far-reaching impacts into the future. To divide a country along cultural and linguistic lines would create national issues well into the future. Now, taking a look back at the American Revolution, the Americans fought because they wanted more freedom from Great Britain. The British disagreed and instead believed it was because the Americans had too much freedom. So Great Britain wanted to avoid mob rule over democracy and republicanism in their remaining British North American colonies, and the 1791 Constitutional Act did just that. The Act strengthened the power of the governor. Major decisions would be made directly by the governor and an unelected council, modeled roughly on the British House of Lords. There was an elected assembly, but it did not have final authority. So the Act created the colonial hierarchy of Canada, with the governor and lieutenant governor at the top representing British authority. Under the governor was the council, whose members came from established families and were appointed by the governor. And under the council was the assembly, who were elected and made up of male landowners. It was an odd mix of imperial and republican views, with an appointed council overseeing an elected assembly. And when it came to land ownership and civil law, each colony would operate under different rules. Upper Canada followed English law, where private ownership and land sales were allowed. Lower Canada would follow its semi-feudalistic seigneurial system. Now, way back in episode 11, we discussed Samuel de Champlain as being the father of New France. Well, the father of Upper Canada would be John Graves Simcoe. Simcoe was a commander of the Loyalist troops during the American Revolution and became Upper Canada's first lieutenant governor. Lieutenant because he was subordinate to Guy Carleton, the overall governor of Canada. Simcoe set about to build a little England in Upper Canada, in the heartland of what would become Ontario. He thought that the Americans dreamed of becoming Canadian and began offering lands to anyone who was prepared to renounce the Revolution and swear loyalty to Britain. Simcoe didn't immediately build towns, but simply plotted them on a map, and land speculators began buying up huge tracts of land. In just 4 years, from 1792 to 1796, Simcoe did extensive surveys and established a working political and legal structure that was a model of British institutions. He also founded a garrison called York on the shores of Lake Ontario. The natives called it Toronto. Well, that's it for this episode. Let's summarize. In this episode, we saw that Guy Carleton returned to Canada as overall governor and was titled as Lord Dorchester. That the Loyalist immigrants petitioned to have the larger colony of Quebec split in two. So the Constitutional Act of 1791 divided the colony of Quebec along the Ottawa River and into Upper and Lower Canada. We saw that an odd mix of imperial and republican views formed a new government with the governor and lieutenant governor at the top representing British authority. Then came the unelected council, and under the council was the assembly, who were elected. We also saw that John Gray Simcoe, a commander of the Loyalist troops during the American Revolution, became Upper Canada's first lieutenant governor and is considered the father of Upper Canada. And finally, from 1792 to 1796, Simcoe did extensive surveys and established a working political and legal structure. He also founded a garrison, which later became called Toronto. Now, please stay tuned for the next episode, episode 29, where we jump into the American Revolution, part 5, and its continued impacts on Canada. In this episode, we'll look into the slave trade and what's going on in Canada's interior. Now remember, at any time, feel free to leave comments or questions below, and I'll do my best to respond to them all. And please, be a true Canadian and be polite. And if you like this content, please subscribe to my channel and give it a thumbs up. And hit the bell if you'd like to be notified of any new content. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.